Hey, Louis.
What up?
How's it going?
Going all right. Just working on a lab write-up right now.
Cool, cool.
How are you doing?
Tired. End of the semester. This semester has been really challenging for I mean not for classes. I mean you guys have been great, but a lot of stuff outside my classes at this job has been really challenging. So yeah, it's been a tough semester.
That's never fun, but we're almost there.
Yep, almost there.
It's definitely nice that this class isn't providing a final, so I don't have to worry that much about it.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, I was never a fan of classes that did both final projects and final exams because then it feels like you can never focus on one or the other one. So I always told myself if I'm going to do a final project, then that's going to be the only thing.
Yeah, definitely. I appreciate it because I've had to do the latter, and it's definitely a little stressful.
Mm-hmm. All right, it's 1 o'clock, so let's go ahead and get started. All right, good afternoon, everyone. How's everyone doing? How's everyone doing today? Good, thumbs up, thumbs up. It's good to hear. All right, it's our last lecture, before or last time, I guess you'll hear from me, because all next week we're doing final presentations. So maybe this is exciting news for you guys. You don't have to hear my voice anymore after today. But yeah. And so today, what I thought we'd do is we go over the lecture notes on computer ethics, because I think we still have quite a bit to go on the environmental ethics notes, but I feel like this one's going to be a little bit more relevant to today's world. Not that environmental issues are not relevant. I mean, those are very important, of course, but I think computer ethics kind of affects kind of a lot of our everyday lives, and so and a lot of you will be working in sectors that have to do with computer and information sciences. And so, I think that would be a good one to go over. Okay. All right. And so, before we get started with that, I want to thank everyone for signing up for a presentation slot. So it looks like everything went, fairly smoothly. Okay. And so I did want to show you the final order. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. And this one. Sound, yes. Okay, so here is the presentation order. So can everyone see it? It's so on Tuesday we have 4 groups, and so we're starting with a Theranos group, then we're going with deepfakes, then the PG&E wildfires, and the Columbia. Okay, and so those are the 4 groups that are slated for Tuesday, and then for Thursday we have we start off with Deepwater Horizon, Ford Pinto, BF Goodrich, and 737 Max. Okay. And so hopefully, I most of the groups signed up, but then I did have to fill in one at the very end. But hopefully everyone in your group is aware of what day that your group is going, and then you plan accordingly. Okay. So any questions on the order here? Okay. All right, so obviously, because this class is taking place virtually, there's going to be no in-person class for us to have the presentation. So, and so on the day of the presentations, I'm going to allow basically you guys to screen share on your own, and then you'll be able to present that way as well. Okay. Question: so does the presentation time have to be 15 minutes? And so 15 minutes is the maximum. You can have it less, and so it's I'm not grading you by the length of the content, which I think is a misconception that everyone has. What's the absolute minimum? So the minimum is just make sure you cover everything in the rubric. Okay, and so I'm grading you based on the content of your presentation, not the time. And so what I've seen before in the past is a few things. And so I've seen presentations that kind of purposely try to fill in space with kind of fluff, with either repeated information or they try to speak really slowly. All right, and so those never get marked really, really well. But there's been a lot of presentations that are that for some of the students they might think is not enough. Like the presentation might only be 10 minutes, 11 minutes. But if you cover all the content and you cover it well, then the fact that you cover it really quickly means you're being really efficient. And so I've given a lot of those kinds of projects solid A's, just because they were efficient with their time. What I have to be is because we have so many groups presenting, I do have to be pretty strict with the time. And so I've had groups in the past that go for 20, 25 minutes. And I wasn't very strict with it before, and then some groups kind of get cut off and they're not able to present. And so I will be pretty strict with the time. So 15 minutes is the maximum. I'll let you go. Just because we only have 4 groups per day, I'll let you go for a couple minutes, maybe 2 or 3 minutes after the time expires to finish up. But past that, I have to cut you off because we have to make time for everyone else. Okay. So please make sure that you're rehearsing it with your group. Everyone knows what part that they're going to say, and you practice saying it. Then you time the whole thing to make sure it's under time. Okay. Usually, from talking to groups in the past that, they only have to go run through it once together. And so as long as you run through it once together, you kind of work out the kinks and make sure your transitions are good, then that's usually fine. Okay. But the presentation is going to take place during lectures next week. And so, make sure you know what day you're presenting. And even if you're not presenting on a certain day, please still come to the lectures to hear these case studies. First of all, just come just to support your peers and your classmates, because presenting is not an easy thing. And so everyone's going to be nervous, and so having some positive reinforcement always helps. But just from your own perspective too, like it's really interesting to hear about a lot of these stories. And that's why I have this that's why I have this final project the way that I have it, is so that you can hear about all these case studies that that you normally wouldn't be able to hear through the lecture on your own. Okay. All right. Any final questions on the presentation order for next week? Okay. All right. And so let's get back to the lecture today. So the theme for today's lecture is going to be computer privacy. Okay. And I want to start us off with a video. And so this video comes from a popular TV series. And so actually, because of that, I do have to pause the recording, because last time I had I played this video on these Parks and Recreation, but I think it highlights an important issue that we're dealing with a lot nowadays, which is the whole idea of digital privacy. Okay. And so that's going to be a big part of the lecture today about, what are some of the aspects and nuances of digital privacy, and what is our role as engineers in terms of, how do we safeguard against this? Yeah. Oh, you haven't seen that clip before? Yeah, that's where the meme comes from of someone throwing their computer into the garbage. All right. And so with that said, let's go ahead and start with the lecture today. Okay. And so the topic for today is computer and technology ethics. Okay, and so let me start by saying that computers have found a way to be part of our everyday life, right? And it's very fitting that I say that now as I'm conducting a college lecture through a computer, which all of you are also viewing through a computer too, right? And so computers have become just such a natural part of our daily lives that it's almost impossible to imagine life without them anymore. Okay. And in fact, everyone basically carries around a fully functional computer in their pockets, right? And so everyone has a phone, that they use for so many different things, right? And so, computers are always with us, whether we want it to be or not. Okay. But and this is great because it allows us to do so many wonderful things. And so it allows us to do things like chat with our friends and family. It allows us to pay our bills. Allows us to watch videos on YouTube, just like we just did. Okay, it allows us to schedule our lives and everything. Okay, and computers, just like a lot of great technologies that we make use of, have been developed by engineers and computer scientists. Okay. Oops, I spelled computers wrong. Okay. And so I highlight this fact just to emphasize the fact that computers are just another technology that engineers have developed, right? And just like we've been talking about the last few weeks, any technology that an engineer produces, it has to it has to uphold our professional engineering standards. Okay. And so we've talked about things like health and safety in terms of in terms of like physical health, right? In terms of, maybe like your car has to be safe, or an elevator has to be safe, building has to be safe. But computers bring its own risks, right? And so it can expose dangers to people that may not necessarily be physical, but it's still important to consider these, in general. Okay. All right. And one aspect where we talk about the risks that computers pose in our lives is the issue of privacy. And I feel like this discussion of privacy, evolves into a different beast every year, just because, every year there's a new app that comes out that harvests certain amount of information for you, and it's tracking all these different things, right? And so, especially in recent times, and by recent times, I mean the last, 5-10 years, one thing that computers have gotten really, really good at is recording information about us and storing that somewhere. Okay? Okay. And I feel like this is something that's part of the national discussion. It's getting more and more traction, right? But on the one hand, this is not a bad thing, because this can be used for a lot of really convenient applications, right? And so let's think of just some examples of that. And so let's say that you're going to go to Amazon, right? You can type into your web browser right now, Amazon.com, and Amazon already has some kind of idea of what you want to buy, right? Even before you know that you want to buy it or not, right? And so that can help you, efficiently find products. Okay. You open up YouTube. So you open up YouTube, and YouTube will already suggest, a reel of videos that you think might be of interest to you. Okay. And a lot of times they're right. And so YouTube will suggest a video to you, and it'll provide you some entertainment, even if it's only for just a minute or two. Okay. And so, the reason that these algorithms can exist, and the reason that, these websites can predict these things, is because it's recording and storing information about you. Okay. And on the one hand, that's really nice. But on the other hand, it can also be very, very creepy as well. And so with all this convenience comes, an invasion of privacy, right? And so, computers are just kind of storing all these personal details about us that, maybe a lot of us are not comfortable with sharing with a lot of people. Okay. Okay. And so the problem with this is that, a lot of times when we do give information to these to these tech companies, a lot of times we're giving information without us really realizing, and that's where kind of the ethical gray area comes into play. Okay. All right. Any questions on this so far? Okay. Oh, question?
So the negative consequence of sharing information would be like being hacked and in a way get blackmailed, right?
That's definitely one of the extreme consequences, for sure. And so, in the worst possible case, someone could get, really intimate, personal information about you, and then actually use that against you to either threaten you or to get you to do things that you may not be comfortable with. But and so definitely that's definitely one of the risks. But there's other risks and other kind of more minor consequences that could happen as well. And and we'll talk about that today. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so let's talk about the different aspects of privacy, as what we understand it, and then talk about how computers can kind of fit into these aspects. Okay. Okay. And so the first one, and probably the one that a lot of people think about the most, is called informational privacy. Okay. And so informational privacy refers to the safeguarding of personal information of yourself that you might not want others to know. Okay. Okay. And so, of course, the way that computers can violate this the sense of privacy is through, first of all, collecting information about you, and then using it to construct databases that, that are comprised of this information. Okay. Okay. And so some information that would be sensitive for people would be things like their income, things like their purchasing habits, medical conditions and political affiliation, sexual orientation, all of these are typically very sensitive informations that, that not everyone wants others to know about. Okay. Okay. And so another aspect of privacy is known as physical privacy. And so physical privacy refers to the safeguarding of anything physical that would be placed within your boundaries. Okay. And so you can think of this as kind of like safeguarding your own personal space. Okay. And so, I think a lot of these, a lot of cases of physical privacy refer to, if people either break into your house, or or they violate kind of your physical boundaries, when you're outside, you're walking around. But computers can play a role in this as well, because part of your physical boundaries also involves, things like, having to talk to someone, or having to deal with something that you don't want to deal with at a certain time. Okay. And so one way that computers can violate our physical privacy is by giving out our phone numbers to people like telemarketers or robocallers, so they call us at times that we don't want to be called at. Okay. Okay. Excuse me. I've literally gotten calls from telemarketers and robocallers like in the middle of my lectures, and so it actually happened this semester in this class too. So I have my phone right here just to just in case of emergencies, in case something happens. And I've gotten calls and I don't recognize the number, and then I call it back later, and then it tells me about the extended warranty on my car has expired, and they need to talk to me. Yeah, it's really annoying. Let me show, actually, let me show you. So even just yesterday, I got these 3 phone calls, and I'm not sure if you can really see this, but there are 3 numbers that were all very slightly different from each other, calling me about something. So I picked up the first one, and then no one was there, and then 2 more called, and the numbers are only the last 2 digits are only slightly different. It's like, come on, man. I thought we were supposed to get rid of these robocallers, but it's still a thing, and so it is really annoying, and that's an example of that, and so. I for sure have not given my number to these people voluntarily, but they've definitely got it from some kind of database that a computer has collected from me at some point. Yeah. I see. Yeah, they're very clever with how they kind of disguise their numbers. It's extremely annoying. Yeah. I know, right? Yeah, my car's warranty is in danger. They're just looking out for me. All right, any questions on this so far? Okay. All right, and so the third notion of privacy, which actually is becoming a much bigger deal, and actually, and I'm looking forward to the deepfakes group to kind of talk about this more, is the idea of proprietary privacy. And so what this refers to is the safeguarding of one's name, likeness, or other parts of their identity. Okay. And so this first became an issue, just through the idea of identity theft, right? And so people were stealing other people's identities and signing up for credit cards or things like that. Okay. Refinancing your home. I wish I had a home too. You and I both. Right, and so the first thing that comes to mind when you talk about proprietary privacy is identity theft. So someone stealing your name and using that to to protect their own identity. Okay. Okay. But as technology improves, especially with the development of things like machine learning and AI software, then it's becoming increasingly dangerous to have your face out there in public as well. All right, and so I don't want to steal deepfakes thunder, because I know they're going to talk about it a lot next week. But even just your face, being out there in social media land, people can actually start to use that for very nefarious things as well. But you'll definitely hear a lot more of it from deepfakes for sure. Okay. Okay. All right. So those are the three I'd say main aspects of privacy that we're mostly concerned about. And obviously computers can have a very big influence on each of these areas. Okay. And these are all kind of the bad things, but the reason that a lot of these technologies exist is they were developed to produce at least some public good. Okay. And so a lot of the discussions around privacy for various different things the discussions usually center around the idea of how much do we sacrifice individually for the public good. Okay. And so let's talk about that right now. Okay. All right, and so there are lots of ways that computers can encroach upon our feelings of privacy, but a lot of these technologies and a lot of these algorithms were not developed with malicious intent, at least explicitly. Okay. Okay. Right. So I always think about, the engineer at Amazon, where, like, everyone gets mad at Amazon for collecting all this information about us. But I always kind of imagine this engineer at Amazon that's working. He's like, I just wanted you to find a nice gift for your nephew, And so, a lot of these technologies were created so that, to either increase the convenience for people or to save them time, right? And so that's always kind of important to remember. And that's not to say that, people don't use these technologies now for malicious things, but, part of the reason why they were developed was to actually provide some good for humanity. Okay. But at the same time, we can't ignore the fact that, these systems are collecting a lot of information about us. People can abuse that as well. Okay. And so, the question is, where do we kind of draw the line from, how much information should a computer be able to collect from us versus, weighing that against the amount of public good or social utility that can provide. Okay. Okay. And there's actually, some aspects of this technology that I would say is almost universally accepted as providing something positive. Okay. And so, one aspect of this that I think I guess it's hard to say nowadays with how people are, but I would wager to say that maybe close to 95, 96, 97% of people support. Number one would be like criminal background checks. Okay. Okay. And so these are always conducted, whenever a firearm is purchased, right? And so if someone wants to buy a gun, they run, whoever the vendor of the gun has to run a criminal background check, right? And so I think most people would say this is a good thing, so that guns don't fall into the hands of bad people. Okay. And so, and the only reason we can have that technology of criminal background checks is because, we're collecting that kind of information on people. Okay. In the same vein, there's also the registry or the database of sexual offenders as well, right? And so everyone that's committed some kind of sexual crime has to register as a sexual offender, right? And so that's also a good thing, so that employers or other people will know, who has committed these kinds of crimes in the past before, right? And so all of these are typically kind of good things. Okay? Another example is just credit cards. Okay? Okay. And so credit cards are another, another technology whose use depends very strongly on recording and maintaining information about the people that use their credit cards. So they can do things like protect against fraud, and they can verify, the payments very, very quickly. Okay. And so that's another system that, we use every day, that I think everyone agrees is a very good and convenient thing, at the expense of some information about us. Okay. And so these are two good examples, but of course, there's plenty of bad examples as well that we've talked about previously. And so, where we draw the line between, like, what's a good use of our information versus what's an exploitive use of our information, I think will continue to be a debate, for many, many years to come. Okay. Especially as technologies improve, as algorithms improve, and new applications come up, this is something that's always going to be a thing. And so, if you end up working for a company like these, just kind of be aware that this is going to be a discussion for you to always have. Okay. Okay, any questions on this so far? Okay. All right, so let's kind of hear, and so let's hear both sides of the argument, right? And so let's hear from advocates that want stronger privacy laws, and let's hear from advocates that don't want that want less privacy laws. Okay? All right, and so advocates for stronger privacy laws, they almost always argue from a perspective of a respect for people or individual rights for people. Okay. Okay. And so what they argue is that there are lots of details about ourselves that we only share with the people closest to us, and some information about ourselves that we don't even share with the people closest to us. Okay. And so, we would never think about sharing this kind of information with, maybe the people we see on the bus, or maybe the people that we wait in line at Starbucks with. Okay. And so, just the idea that some engineer at some big tech company can have this information is really, concerning for these people. Okay. Okay. And so, that's kind of the perspective that people have, is that these advocates have, is that, information that we have is sacred to us, right? And so we don't want that information getting out. And so, we should have stronger privacy laws in order to protect that information. Okay. And so the other side of the argument, they argue from a public goods perspective, right? And so in other words, they argue from a utilitarian perspective. Okay. And so what they argue is that collecting and storing information about the population can lead to lots of public good for a relatively small amount of a relatively minor cost to individual people. Okay. Okay. right? And so we've talked about those uses already, right? And so the government uses databases like these to, prevent fraud and catch criminals, okay? And so without that information about people, then this would not be possible, okay? Okay, and so with that, I want to do a quick activity, okay? And so let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. And so, I've brought up these, 4 instances of relatively recent technology. Well, it was recent when I wrote these notes a few years ago, but some of these are old hat now. Okay. And so I'm going to split you guys into breakout rooms, and I want you to discuss, the good and bad aspects of these certain kinds of technologies. Okay. And so I'm going to create 8 different breakout rooms. And so depending on the number of your breakout room, you're going to discuss whether these technologies can be good or bad. Okay. And so we're just going to do it really quick. So, I'll have you guys discuss for maybe about 5, 6, 7 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll kind of, we'll kind of debrief after that. Okay. All right. So let me go ahead and split people off. Where is breakout rooms? Okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and split you guys off, and so go ahead and I'll share this screen so that you can see it. And then so depending on the number of your breakout rooms, either discuss a positive or a negative quality of these kinds of technologies. Okay, and so we'll come back at around 1:45. All right, everyone, welcome back. Welcome, welcome. All right, just a few more seconds and then we'll continue on. All right, everyone's back. All right, so while I get set up with my iPad, again, does anyone want to share something interesting you guys discussed in your breakout rooms?
I mean, we discussed facial recognition. If it was a good thing, and we only thought of two things off the top of our heads, which is like ease of access. Phones and computers are starting to incorporate that technology. And someone in our group mentioned, like, in that same technology, like, if you want to make a purchase, you hit a button, scans your face, boom, you're done. And they can also help prevent crimes in some cases. Facial recognition of like the person who committed the crime, and then later they can backtrack and find them.
Yep. Yeah, no, all those are great examples of that. And I think this is a very I would say charged one, because I think a lot of people have very strong feelings about this. On the one hand, there are those, a lot of those, and I can definitely see all those being, good things that are be good for the public as well. I think there's no question, less crime and, more convenience, I think will be good for everyone. But, at what cost though? So, definitely very interesting discussion. We're definitely not going to come to a conclusion about it here. But I want you guys to think about these kinds of things, because as technology gets better and better at kind of recognizing us and collecting more information, comes with some cost as well. Okay, but it's important to see kind of both the good side and the bad sides of these kinds of technologies. Right? Great. So I'm glad you guys were able to take part in that. Okay. And so where do we go from this, right? And so obviously there's a lot of good, but also a lot of bad can come with these technologies. And so how do we balance all these things? Okay? And so let's talk about finding what I like to call creative middle ground. Right. Because I think most people are kind of in the middle on these kinds of issues, right? And so, yes, the public good and the convenience are great, but I think not everyone is ready to sacrifice a lot of their information. Okay, and so how do we go about this and kind of balance these two extremes? Okay, and so one thing that can really help is something we talked about at the very beginning of our ethics unit, which is this idea of consent. Okay. Okay. And so anytime you're going to ask someone to to take some kind of risks, consent is always going to be there to help with that. Okay. And so just to kind of remind you about consent. So if as long as individuals are made aware of the types of information that they're sharing, as well as the types of consequences that can occur to other people owning it, then of course then people can make better informed decisions of what to do with that information. Okay. Okay. The problem with this is actually getting people to to understand what exactly that they're giving up, right? And so I think kind of the most blatant example of this is if you ever sign up for a new app or you get a new phone and you try to read the terms of service, that's something that I think literally no one ever does except for the lawyers that work for Apple and Google and Samsung and things like that, right? And so right now, as it stands, these platforms and these and these tech companies don't write this information in a way that can actually be understood for people, right? I think there was an art exhibit, somewhat recently where the artist basically took word for word the terms of service for using an iPhone or signing up for Facebook or signing up for Instagram, and then they just wrote it on a wall, the entire thing. And some of them, and these are very large exhibit halls, so they're maybe like 2 stories tall, and you wrote it from top to bottom, and it would go all the way from the top of the wall down to the floor, and then some of them would actually go along the floor as well. That's how long and obtuse some of these privacy terms of service are. And so literally nobody is going to have time to read through all that, not the less understand it. Yeah, it's beautiful, but also kind of depressing at the same time. Beautifully depressing or depressingly beautiful, depending on your perspective, right? And so that's a problem, right? And so people, I'm as guilty of this as anyone. So whenever I download a new app, they say terms of service and they make you agree, I just scroll as fast as I can to the bottom and I hit agree just so that I can continue using the app. But of course, this is a very dangerous and predatory practice. Okay, and so finding a way to effectively inform people about the information that they're sharing, and then effectively getting consent, I think it's still not being done well. And so I think there could be a lot of improvement on this in this area for sure. Okay. Another way that we can kind of find a creative middle ground is to rely on on government regulation, on government laws. Okay. Okay. And so they can do this by placing limits on, either what kinds of information can be collected and how this information is stored. Okay. Okay. And so this can help, but companies and other organizations will find ways around this. Okay. And so usually the trend is that companies are kind of always one step ahead of the law in one way or another. Okay. And so there's ways around this, but some of the guidelines that the law outlines right now can offer some good guidelines, right? And so how these are actually enforced, is a different thing. And in fact, there was an act that was passed in 1974 called the Privacy Act, and there's a lot of good tenets in this act that that can be used as good steward guidelines for protecting individual privacy. Okay. Okay. And so, 1974 was a long time ago, and technology has improved a lot since then. And so, it's safe to say that a lot of this information is fairly outdated, or I should say the methods of enforcement are fairly outdated. But, by looking at the main kind of tenets of this act, we can come up with some good guidelines on how and what, in terms of what we as engineers, how we can responsibly handle personal information. Okay. All right, and so there's 6 kind of main points to this act. Okay, and so the first one is states that the existence of a database, of a personal information database, should be public knowledge. Okay. Okay. And so in theory, this tenet sounds nice because, if someone's going to be collecting information about you, you should be aware of who's doing it, right? And that information should not be hidden. Okay. And so there shouldn't be some kind of shadowy, organization that's collecting information about you without your knowledge. Okay. And so in theory, this one sounds nice, but again, this one is also impossible to enforce because there's so many databases out there right now that knowing all of them out there is impossible. And just in the spirit of full disclosure, my own computer in my office counts as a database for personal information, because I have all your names and all your grades and all your CWIDs on my computer. And so not that I do anything with it, and not that I share it with anyone, but I have that information because it's necessary for me to do my job. Okay. And probably all your faculty have that information as well. Okay. And so I'm pretty sure most of you were aware of that, but that's not something that the school regularly goes and says. And so point number 1 here, good in theory, but also impossible to really enforce, and also impossible to really for any individual person to know, just because there's people's information is on so many different databases now it's impossible to keep track of. Okay. All right. Any questions on this? Okay. All right, number 2. So number 2 states that personal information should only be collected for narrow and specific purposes, and only for these purposes. Okay. Okay. And so again, this tenet right here, this is really nice in theory, because if someone is going to collect something sensitive about you, some kind of personal information, they should only use it for a very narrow and very specific use and application. Okay. And this is to prevent people abusing your information and using it for something more evil and nefarious. Okay. And so in theory, this one is great. And so, companies should have to, disclose, and they have to justify the use of information, and it has to be for such a very specific purpose, to ensure that the information is being used for good. Okay. And so in theory, this one's great, but this is another one where in practice, it's very hard to, enforce, because, especially with how interconnected a lot of these technological systems are. Like you think of like the whole ecosystem of Apple products, right? And so your Apple information is used, for so many different things. The Apple can essentially argue that, we collect all this information, and it's used for all of our different products. And so, and then when you have such a wide scope like that, it's very easy to kind of things to slip between the cracks, if you kind of know what I mean. Okay. And so for them to, share your information with, maybe with the collaborator of theirs, or to do something else with the information, all of that could be justified under their wide scope. Okay. And so again, number 2 is something that's a little bit outdated, but its intentions are noble. Okay. All right. Number 3. Number 3 is that personal information should only be collected with informed consent. Okay. And so again, a very noble cause. And so, people should always, whenever they give up personal information, they should always do it voluntarily. Okay. But again, we just got finished talking about how obtuse and how long, those terms of services are, that, no one could ever hope to understand all of it. Okay. Number 4, personal information should not be shared with third parties without notice or consent. Okay. And this, part of the act is just to make sure that your information doesn't get passed around a lot, because who knows what the other companies might use with the information. Okay. But again, another one that's very hard to enforce. Okay. All right, number 5, information should only be stored for a limited amount of time. Okay. And so if a company's done using your information for something, they should, they should only keep it for the amount of time that they're using it. Okay. And so if they have no more use for it anymore, they should just delete your data. Okay. And this is just to make sure that, your information just isn't sitting on a server somewhere, just for someone to kind of randomly find it. Okay. And so your information should be used up until the company needs it. And then once it's not needed anymore, then they should get rid of it. Okay. All right. Number 6. And so number 6 says that those who collect and store personal data should ensure the physical safety and integrity of their systems. Okay. Okay. And so what this means is that if you're Facebook or you're Amazon and you're collecting information on people, then it's your responsibility, Facebook, Amazon, to make sure that you don't get hacked by by people. Okay. Because because the kind of the implicit agreement is that if someone's sharing their information with you, then they trust you to kind of safeguard that information, and so that it doesn't fall into the wrong hands. Okay. And so if you get hacked, that's your responsibility, and you have to pay consequences for that. And of course, this is not this is not true nowadays, right? I mean, it is true that the companies, they have the responsibility to protect themselves from hacking, But when companies do get hacked, the people never ever benefit from it, right? And so you hear it almost every day in the news, like this big company got hacked, and then several million people got their information leaked, and then then the company looks bad for maybe like 12 minutes, and then everyone forgets about it, right? In an ideal world, if a company loses your information or lets it get hacked, then they should compensate you in some degree. But obviously that hasn't happened at all. Okay, I think even the closest one to that was when I think it was that big financial company got hacked, and a lot of people's information got stolen, and they were actually sued for it. And then they were supposed to give compensation to a lot of the victims, but it still really hasn't happened. Yes, yeah, TurboTax, that was the one. Yeah. And so of course nothing is going to come of that. They just get some bad PR for 12 minutes, and then everyone just forgets about it. And everyone just goes back to using TurboTax as usual. Yeah, bad PR is not what it used to be. And so people have like goldfish memory nowadays, and so people kind of forget that a lot of companies do bad things with their information, and then they just go on using their services like it's nothing. Oh yeah, you can come up with so many different examples of these things. Yeah. All right, any questions on this? Okay, all right, and so for the last 8 minutes, I want to talk about something a little bit different. And so we spent all day talking about privacy, but there are other aspects of computer ethics that are important to know. Okay. And I think this is going to be relevant for a lot of you guys too, because I know we have some computer scientists in the audience, but even a lot of you engineers too. You'll probably go out and develop code. Okay, and so I want to talk about what are the ethics surrounding how you safeguard your work as a coder. Okay, and so this is called copyrights and ownership of computer software. Okay. And so this is a really big issue in terms of computer software development. Okay, and so how do you declare ownership over a piece of code? Okay, and so let's talk about just kind of ownership in general. And so when you say that you own something, and you own something physical, it's relatively straightforward, right? And so let's say you own a car. Okay, and so by owning the car, you get the keys to the car, right? And so by having the keys, you get to decide, who gets to be in your car, who is not allowed in your car. You decide when the car runs, when it doesn't run, things like that. Okay. And so ownership of something physical is very easy to imagine. Okay. I wish it was something like that. Yeah. But ownership of code is very difficult, right? Because your code exists not as a physical object, but it exists as a digital file within your computer. Okay. And so because of that, code can easily be either transferred, it can be shared, it can be copied and used by other computers without really much effort or even without your knowledge. Okay. And so how do we rate ownership of code, and how do we actually enforce that? Okay. Okay. And even a fair question should be asked. Should software ownership be protected? Okay. Okay. Because if you've done any kind of code development, you know that there's there's this whole idea of open sourcing your software, right? And so if you open source your software, then you basically let the world access your software, right? And open sourcing is great, right? And so if you've ever worked in development and you're trying to develop code for something else, you try to, and the first place you probably look is you see, are there any open source projects that are similar to what I want to do, okay? And if there are, then that's great. Then you can use their open source code, and and it can help you out, okay? And so open sourcing can lead to a lot of great benefits, okay? On the other hand, if you are open sourcing your code, or or in the worst case, if someone open sources it for you, then it can kind of feel like you produced all this work and you're not being fairly compensated for it, okay? And so one argument for for having stiff protections for software ownership is to encourage innovation, to encourage code development. Okay. Because if you've taken a programming class, and so let's say that you've taken 205, or for our computer scientists, I'm sure you have tons and tons of programming classes that you've taken. Okay. And so anyone that's developed code will tell you that developing code is not easy. Okay. And a lot of the difficulty in writing code is not actually in typing the code. So typing the code actually takes a very small amount of time. But the difficulty in writing a code is, first of all, determining what the code should do, and second of all, making sure that it actually works the way that you intend it to be. Okay, and so at least for myself, when I develop code, I would say about 90% of my time is spent debugging. Okay, and so that takes a lot of time. That takes a lot of effort. Right? And so if you think about codes that are developed professionally, that takes even more time, because these are really big code systems. Okay. And you don't really see the benefits of that development until you kind of sell your product. Okay. And so the argument here is that if software ownership was very lax, then you can spend all this time developing a code. You can spend weeks, months developing a code, and then if someone kind of just steals your code, then they kind of reap the benefits of your code without all that work, right? And so the issue from here becomes compensation, right? And so the question to ask is are people being fairly compensated for all the work that they're doing in protecting or developing codes? Okay, and a lot of times it's a lot of times it's not, right? And so if someone shares your code without your knowledge, then they're just basically just going to copy your code, and you're not going to see any of the benefits from that. Okay. But on the other side of the code, is patent part of copyrights, or is something? Patent is actually something different, and unfortunately, we're not going to get to it in the lecture notes, but you can read it at the ends. Yeah. But before we go, I want to say that opponents on the other side will say that actually if you share code, it actually encourages innovation, because then what happens is that if you open source a lot of your code and you want to do something similar, then you can kind of borrow from someone and write that and use their code, while you can kind of focus on other issues. Okay. And so what can happen is that if people are very kind of stingy with their code and they don't want to share it, then you have multiple people kind of basically writing the exact same code, and people are probably going to be running into the exact same errors. And so some people view that as kind of wasted effort or wasted time, when we could be focusing on other things. Okay. And so there's kind of pros and cons to it, kind of as anything else in life. Okay. And so generally, at least in the United States, government regulators actually agree with this mindset that that there should be strong protections for people to develop their code so that people can reap the benefits, and then those benefits can help propel people to develop really, really nice codes. Okay. All right. Any final questions before we wrap it up for today? Okay. All right. And so that's all we have time for. So thank you everyone for tuning in, and thank you everyone for signing up for a project a final presentation date. Okay. And so when we come back next week on Tuesday, we're going to start right away with final presentations. Okay. And so we're going to start with the Theranos group on Tuesday. Okay. All right. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Hope everyone has a great weekend. If you have any questions on the presentation, don't be afraid to shoot me an email and I'd be happy to help. Okay. And so thank you everybody. I'll see you next week and have a good weekend.
Thank you, Professor.
Thanks, guys.
Professor, real quick, I just had a question about the report.
Yep.
So I'm working on the technical context and stuff.
Yep. Mhm.
So we're doing the Boeing 737 MAX crashes.
Okay.
And I was curious if the pilot training and I guess the more personal level would be considered part of the technical context. So their training and stuff. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really important for that as well, so that you cover that. So yeah, absolutely. And I think that would probably be the best section for it compared to everything else. And so it may not be engineering numbers and equations, but it is a technical part of the issue, and I think it should definitely be talked about. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.